Greetings, dear friends. The operational situation at the front by the end of the 4th of February. At the end of the summary, we will also talk about the news background, but we will start with the Cuban direction. The Cuban matchmaker segment of the AVDEEVKA starch front and the messages that we received today from this section of the front. So, we said on the previous broadcast that the enemy is now trying to attack the Russian troops with the widest possible coverage. That is, not only the AVDEEVKA area in the western direction, and there are a number of dominant heights in the western direction, but at the same time, south of AVDEEVKA itself, along the pike beam in the western direction from the starch area, in the direction of the settlement, but this is all more of a distraction, I would say. At the same time, footage was published, as well as a number of reports about attacks in the direction of Kotlyárovka. Conditionally, the positions of western Kotlyárovka along the road in the direction of the fortified area, that here, just from a forest plantation, approximately from this area, Russian troops concentrated some fairly large grouping by the standards of such offensive actions here, with the use of small infantry groups. This means about 40 people there, who were naturally allowed to storm the positions, and active hostilities continue with varying success. So, according to the geolinking, there were shots from the enemy that Russian troops captured one of the strongholds. So there are trenches there. Someone compares it with what is to the north, or even calls that this one was not taken. But yes, the enemy is attacking here, and really has partial success, because the situation is dynamic due to the fact that the APU is undertaking counterattacks, and it cannot be said that Russian troops are steadily holding positions, because this is not the first time that Russian troops have been knocked out from the same AVDEEVKA from some part. Therefore, the situation remains quite dynamic with us, without significant changes. But I think, as they said in AVDEEVKA, we have been there for 24 hours, I think I would even say 48 hours, taking into account the fact that the fighters themselves from the AFU sites report that additional forces have been transferred by Russian troops. I think there will be more or less a concrete picture of that what's going on here. We do not record any significant changes in the Lyman direction. The main fighting is also in the gray zone, and they asked me to clarify what we were talking about. The situation is being clarified in the area of Yar-Laptev, in the gray zone, that Russian troops attacked in the western direction. There are even reports from our side that the enemy has partial success. So, we have no visual confirmation for the evening of the 4th of February. Yes, there are actually reports from our fighters that they have advanced, and reports that the enemy is very seriously pressing on this sector of the front. But let's be honest, about this area may be read, but it will be visible within 24 hours, if it is not possible to knock out during a counterattack Russian troops from a number of positions. Therefore, the situation, as I said, remains to be clarified. It takes about a day to really see the picture, whether Russian troops will be able to gain a foothold, because there are a number of positions where they attacked, they were not allowed to gain a foothold, and the situation remained dynamic. According to the Bakhmut direction, we can say that virtually all attacks were repulsed without any changes. Although it should also be noted that the situation is quite tense, as the fighters themselves report from the field that Russian troops are attacking. That is, the enemy forces are large, so there is no APU here, that the positionality there is a minimum number of shots. No, assault actions are being carried out on both sides, and the APU counterattacks, and does not allow us to gain a foothold. As we had in Ivanovo, the fact that one of the soldiers of the 93rd Brigade reported that they went into a settlement, but they were not allowed to gain a foothold. But in any case, the enemy undertakes such sorties, and naturally it is necessary to conduct these heavy battles on this sector of the front. The main activity, if we spoke before between Ivanovsky and Kleshivka, now we will probably say that in the direction of Ivanovsky, although many assumed that they would put pressure in Bogdanovka itself, but no, the vector is changing now to Ivanovskaya. Although on the one hand there are a number of difficulties that Russian troops may face, but at the same time, due to the very short distance from the Garden Association, the basements of the Garden Association to Ivanovo, it allows, let's say, the number of drones that are used to make less effective due to the basements, without being in an open area. Well, plus, there are two forest belts, north and south of the road. Therefore, opponents naturally use them. And recently, as you have seen, the same Butusev published footage, we once spoke for them, that our drone flew into a Russian fighter, but he fought off with a stick. Yes, and there are such cases therefore. But why did the drone stop? Because just the same Russian fighter ran in, there was a forest belt near the road, he runs into it. Accordingly, the drone can simply fly into the branches, so it stops, and then he managed to grab a stick and bang the drone. There is also such a thing, the drone did not explode, did not detonate. Therefore, there are such moments, and believe me, a very big bet is being made on this now by the Russian command, as we talked about, on the green and in general on the forest belts of the forest plantations. Moving on. AVDEEVKA direction. The Avdiivka and Kharkiv directions, we have active military operations in general in these two directions. We will start with the AVDEEVKA direction, the northern flank. It means that we have active military operations in the Stepovoy area. Here, Russian troops made several attempts to attack a number of AFU positions in the western part and advance in this direction. We managed to repel all the attacks that we had between the model and the Garden Association Takmash, that is, approximately in this area, in an open field, they attacked, including with the support of armored vehicles. We have said in previous broadcasts that it is possible to stop behind the railway, that is, not allowing them to cross it. At the same time, yes, they periodically pull up, there are such cases, no one denies. And as you remember, even the Russian T-90 drove into the western part, there are such cases. Therefore, somewhere they manage, somewhere they restrain them, and somewhere they manage to actually go behind the railway, to the east, west of the railway, and accordingly, attack with the support of armored vehicles. In any case, we state the situation unchanged. What about the northern part? We will talk about two sites. The first one is to the south of the treatment facilities, because Russian troops are also quite large forces here. These are small infantry groups, but when they unite, when there are from 7 to 10 of them, then naturally they are large forces attacking in the south-southwest direction. The main goal is to enter the territory of the Garden Association, take basement rooms. Well, it has already been announced from the Russian side that their main plan for the north is to get to the supply road about 0542, as close as possible to it. It cannot be said that in a city battle they will be able to take it under partial fire control at the distance where they are now, but in any case they are now betting to take it under full fire control, that is, to establish control over approximately this part. Therefore, the pressure comes both from the south of the treatment facilities and behind the Stavka cascade in Avdiivka itself, in its northern part. Today, not only military commander Saplienko, but also Butusev also commented on the critical situation, describing it. And according to reports from fighters from the field, in general, for tonight, on the evening of the 4th of February, the enemy is pressing between the cascade of stakes and the sand pit. Our main active military operations are approximately in this area and continue. The situation is dynamic, but here, without exaggeration, I will say about the same as I said during the battles for Bakhmut, the hardest, fierce battles. This is not something without exaggeration, it's even downplaying very heavy fighting, it's close-range shooting battles, an urban type of battle as you understand. Therefore, it is very, very difficult. Plus, the fighters themselves are now reporting that the number of tactical air strikes is increasing. In other words, the Russian command, seeing the situation that exists on the battlefield, and of course now, it will use the full range of weapons as much as possible. Therefore, I would say it is a very difficult situation. But, as the fighters themselves say, we still have time to relatively stabilize the situation. But it's difficult to talk about anything here at all, because, well, if you discard my opinion, yes, go to some other plane. Rustam Umarov, has a statement that the enemy uses 3 times more ammunition. There are a number of messages from both Zelensky and the enemy. Well, let's even take from our side what Zelensky said, that there is now a conversation about North Korea providing another million ammunition to the Russian Federation. So yes, they will spend it, what they got, what they produced. Now therefore, the situation is very difficult, in the sense that the enemy is not exhausted today, and it makes no sense to say that he will be exhausted for a week, 2 or 3, it does not make sense at all. Therefore, it is very difficult. As far as possible, the APU, we will speak directly, the main task they are engaged in is the destruction of the enemy. But it is difficult, we will speak directly as it is. In the southern part. So let's probably start the eastern flank initially, because today there are also a number of reports about the activity of Russian troops. As you remember, before they attacked from Kamenka in a southwesterly direction, had partial success, then they were stopped. And there is also a dominant height, as well as the AVDEEVKA landfill, so we have it in this area. And there is another dominant height at the sand pit, which the Russian troops are aimed at. It does not allow them, of course, to advance on this sector of the front. But at the same time, they increase the pressure in general, and not only from the Kamenka area, but also from the conditionally steep beam in the northwest direction. Well, what we talked about before, there are also attacks in the forest area north of the sand quarry in the north direction. Therefore, the eastern flank is now quite active. Why? Because the enemy, I repeat, having seen this gap, having found this gap in the defense, he is not trying to use the entire range of possible weapons that he has, and accordingly stretches the forces of the AFU along AVDEEVKA as much as possible, due to attacks on neighboring sections of the eastern as well as western flanks. Southwest of all that we have AVDEEVKA. We do not record any new changes in the south, so the enemy is as before. So what are the Russian troops doing? Sportivnaya Street, Sobornaya Chernyshevsky Street, is pressed in this direction, that is, within the gray zone, to the intersections. But, at the same time, there is also activity in the direction of garages. Why? Because there are counterattacks on the part of the APU, which are reported by the enemy. And the actual footage is published of these counterattacks. Both from our side there were shots of battles in the area of the Tsars Hunt, and from the side of enemy military commanders published videos. They understand that the key area is the area between the Staroye Avdiivka district and the Vinogradniki Garden Association, and the Yuzhnaya Avdiivka industrial zone, from which the APU attacks are made, and accordingly, they also bet on it. So they are probing the defense, as far as possible to advance along this section. The situation remains dynamic enough, because, well, actually, let's be blunt, even Russian military commanders report that there are no counterattacks, and I am sure there is no way for Russian troops to gain a foothold now. Therefore, they are doing everything possible, but the dangerous situation is precisely at the expense of the northern flank of the Avdiivka direction. Therefore, we will continue to follow the development of events here. But the situation is very complicated. Pervomeyskaya, active fighting along Voroshilev Street without significant changes. The vein trunk has moved into the gray zone. We talked about this on the previous broadcast. There was just the same contour attack from the AFU, because recently there have been a lot of reports, as you remember, that they are pressing in the direction of Krasnogorovka. But here, I would say, not quite Krasnogorovka. The basis is an attempt to align the front line along the cascade of stakes and the river. It means that footage was published from the AFU, where the Russian fighters managed to reach again. It's about in the gray zone. But there is such a situation that they were captured. Therefore, in the trunk of the mine Trudovskaya goes into the gray zone, because as the APU is present in this area, southwest of it Twain trunk and Russian troops. The situation remains dynamic. Now, as for the position of the northwestern brand, the northern brand. So we'll start with one of the supports. Today, Videos were published, videos from the enemy side, of the Russian troops storming Opornik. We have said that there will be a bet on him. There have been positional fighting for a long time. Well, in general, the enemy published, in fact, the support was marked, and the enemy managed to further advance approximately in this area to the north, that is, along the forest belt in the north direction, to take another support. In other words, there are two supports here, so we note the progress. It is small, on the front line up to 120 meters wide, to a depth of up to 100 meters, but there are shots that cause a contradictory opinion. I'm not going to comment on this yet, but my opinion on mobilization, on motivation you've heard. This video is directly related to what you can see there. Therefore, we will postpone this for the future for now, but it is an unpleasant situation. I can say directly for those who have not seen this video, none of the APU fighters died. But they retreated, unfortunately, without a fight. There's just a situation there. There were only 3 Russian fighters, and our 7 and ours retreated. Well, there is such a moment, it's very unpleasant, because you know, I always say, that there should be motivated people. What is. It's unpleasant to see this. Moving on. Active hostilities continue along Georgievka itself. It is possible to stop Russian troops in the area of the Street of the Unknown. We do not record any new changes. But here, we need to say one more very important point. Because having disassembled the whole section, from the Georgievka of the eastern part, to the support. So, before, as you remember, the Russian troops pressed in the northwest direction. We managed to reach approximately this area, then, several armored tanks were destroyed, 2 tanks specifically, and at least 1 Russian armored vehicle. They retreated, but not to their original positions, and here we made adjustments. Occupied part of the forest belt. At the same time, of course, the pressure from their side has shifted to the neighboring site, and they are trying to implement what we talked about before, is to go out, take positions along the forest belt, and then attack Georgievka, the eastern part of Georgievka, not only head-on, but also to deliver a flank strike. That is why Russian troops are trying to implement this task now. In the South Donetsk direction without significant changes. The main military operations are taking place both north and south of Novomykhailovka. The enemy periodically attacks in different directions, not only in the direction of Novomykhailovka itself. There are also in the direction, well, let's take the water one, along the Solinenko beam. There are attempts to advance in the western direction from the support, in the south. Attempts were made, but it was possible to repel all these attacks. At the same time, the number of attacks has really increased. If we compare with the previous month, we have seen some decline and even stabilization of the situation south of Novomykhailovka. But still the Russian troops are not abandoning attempts to advance on this sector of the front. In the Velikonovoselkovsky direction without any changes, in the Orekhovsky direction without any changes. Today, I will only comment on one of the points. This is what Zelensky arrived at work on. It is reported that, in the work itself on arrived, therefore. By the way, this is Zelensky's arrival. I would like to say this in more detail just for a minute. So, it caused a very big commotion on the network, which means that from the Russian troops, there were allegedly no shelling in operation, for which all the artillery stalled. An order was almost given that this was an agreement there. Look, the previous broadcasts who watched, for new viewers I will briefly see. There were reports from Russian military commanders that the AFU now has superiority in this sector of the front, including in this sector of the front, on drones, reconnaissance drones, drop drones, bomber drones with mines of 6 dozen and 82 millimeters. Therefore, artillery cannot be 20 kilometers from the pounds. This is actually the zone where if an artillery installation appears, it will be destroyed very quickly, very quickly. They had to withdraw. A number of military officers complained that superiority, but at the same time said that they have a long range. And then I showed messages from Rogozin himself, who also said that they had to push back, and yes, they are betting on the long-range self-propelled gun coalitions, but there is a problem there. It is not yet in the quantity they need, and it is unlikely that this quantity will be satisfied in the 24th year and based on the production rates, which are. In other words, they leave much to be desired, so to speak. Well, it's certainly good for us, but there is such a situation here that I refute this point, which speak of an agreement, due to the fact that it is necessary to note the professionalism of the AVDEEVKA drone operators, who in general, over the past month, in January-February, were able to move the artillery of the Russian troops there conditionally 20-25 kilometers from the pounds. Therefore, the counter-battery, which Russian military commanders regularly complain about, is not the most effective for them now due to this. Plus, we have the same situation in the Kherson direction to the market and in a number of other areas. Therefore, I think I gave an exhaustive answer, because there were questions, whether this is true or not, what the Russian troops report. No, it's just the professional work of the armed forces of Ukraine, which was not before the arrival of even Zelensky. But for a long time, it was possible to achieve this in a difficult area because Russian troops are making a very big bet to level the front line and accordingly to return control over the settlement to work. There is such a situation. And we do not record any changes in the markets. It means that a number of reports are now again coming from the enemy, that everything is very bad for the AVDEEVKA in this sector of the front. I won't deny that it's an easy walk here, but the enemy also, judging by the footage that Magyar regularly publishes, well, it's not an easy walk for Russian troops either. Plus, no matter how they pull up the artillery, it is destroyed, to which they complain that drone operators are more effective here. The RAP systems of the AVDEEVKA are more effective, but just Russian RAP systems, complexes. They are less effective, comparing with the AVDEEVKA, because they fly the same Baba Yagan's drone, which complain a lot, which actually cause the main blows, fire damage to artillery installations, to the warehouses of the field bull, and so on, and so on. Therefore, we do not record any new changes. Active hostilities continue, as well as mutual artillery shelling. This is the situation we have for the evening of the 4th of February. The situation in AVDEEVKA remains very complicated, but now all the necessary measures are being taken